They called it Black Thursday. October 14, 1943. 291 heavy bombers lifting off from England before dawn, engines roaring through the mist, each one carrying 10 men who knew the odds were against them. Their target: the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt, deep in the heart of Nazi Germany. The factories that kept Panzer tanks rolling. Messerschmitt fighters climbing, the entire German war machine turning. But there was a problem. A fatal problem. At exactly 8:21 that morning, the P-47 Thunderbolt escorts, the toughest fighters America had, would reach the limit of their range and turn back toward England, fuel tanks empty, and the bombers would continue on a lone point 400 miles of hostile airspace. No protection. Just 10 50 caliber machine guns on each fortress, and a doctrine written by men who'd never seen a Focke-Wulf 190 screaming out of the sun at 400 miles per hour. Cannons blazing. The crews already had a name for missions like this: suicide runs. The math was simple. Brutal, but simple. Most men never made it to their 25th mission, not because they lacked courage. American bomber crews were flying into hell every single day, facing flak that could shred aluminum like paper. Enemy fighters that hunted in wolf packs, and temperatures at altitude that plunged to 40 below zero. Not because the planes were weak. The B-17 Flying Fortress was one of the toughest aircraft ever built, bristling with heavy machine guns, able to limp home with entire sections shot away. The problem was distance. Germany's most vital industrial targets sat 800 miles from England, deep inside the Reich, and no American fighter could fly that far, fight when it arrived, and make it home. The P-47 Thunderbolt had a combat radius of 175 miles. The P-38 Lightning could stretch to 300 with drop tanks, but Berlin was 580 miles away. The Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heart, sat 400 miles inland. Every mile beyond fighter protection meant more fortresses tumbling from the sky, trailing smoke and flame. More parachutes blossoming white against gray clouds. More telegrams delivered to farmhouses in Iowa and apartments in Brooklyn. The doctrine had sounded perfect in the briefing rooms. Mass formations of B-17s, each bristling with 13 50 caliber machine guns, would create overlapping fields of fire so devastating that enemy fighters couldn't penetrate. The bombers would defend themselves. Strategic bombing would win the war. Fighter escorts were secondary. That theory died screaming over Germany. It died when 100 Luftwaffe fighters swarmed 40 unescorted fortresses. It died when 20mm cannon shells tore through cockpits and fuel tanks. It died 2 months before Black Thursday, on August 17, when 60 bombers were shot down in a single day. 600 men, gone. 1 week before Black Thursday, 30 more went down over Bremen. The numbers were unsustainable. At this rate, the entire bomber force would be obliterated within 5 missions. The strategic bombing campaign, the centerpiece of America's air war, was failing, and sitting in a filing cabinet at Wright Field in Ohio, gathering dust, was a report about a fighter plane the Army Air Forces had been ignoring for 2 full years. A plane that could have prevented Black Thursday entirely. It was called the P-51 Mustang, and the story of how it was built, rejected, forgotten, and finally saved the war begins not in Washington, not in the Pentagon, but with a desperate British purchasing officer and a company president who made a promise everyone said was impossible. January 1940. Europe is burning. France will fall within months. Britain stands alone. The Luftwaffe is preparing to crush the Royal Air Force and invade England, and James Howard, Dutch Kindleberger, President of North American Aviation, is sitting across from Sir Henry Self of the British Purchasing Commission in a California office, listening to a proposal that makes no sense. Self wants Kindleberger to build Curtiss P-40 fighters under license. The P-40 is adequate. Not good. Adequate. It can dogfight at low altitude but struggles above 15,000 feet. Its Allison engine wheezes and gasps when the air gets thin. But Britain is desperate. They need planes. Any planes. Right now. Kindleberger listens. Then he makes a counteroffer that sounds completely insane. We can design and build you a completely new fighter, he says. One that's better than the P-40. And we can do it in 120 days. 4 months. From blank paper to flying prototype. Self thinks Kindleberger is either lying or delusional. N01 designs and builds a new fighter in 4 months. N01. But Britain is drowning. So Self gives him 120 days to prove it. If Kindleberger fails, the British will take their money elsewhere. What Self doesn't know is that North American's chief designer, a brilliant, obsessive German immigrant named Edgar Schmued, has been sketching a revolutionary fighter design for months. In his head. On napkins during lunch. In notebooks late at night. Schmued is self-taught. He served as an aircraft mechanic in World War I with the Austro-Hungarian forces. After the war, he worked for Fokker in Brazil before immigrating to America in 1931. He joined North American Aviation in 1936. And he's been waiting for this moment. Schmued has a design philosophy that borders on obsession. Every component must serve multiple purposes. A structural member should also be an aerodynamic surface. A cooling duct should also produce thrust. A fuel tank should also be load-bearing structure. Nothing wasted. Everything optimized. For 2 years, he's studied every mistake made by existing fighters. The P-40's radiator hangs below the fuselage like a barn door, creating massive drag. The P-39's engine sits behind the pilot, causing balance nightmares. The Spitfire's elliptical wings are beautiful, but a manufacturing nightmare, requiring thousands of man-hours to hand-build each one. Schmued knows exactly what's wrong with these planes, and he knows how to fix it. He's been developing laminar-flow wings, a radical new concept that maintains smooth airflow at high speeds, reducing drag by 20%. When Kindleberger promises the British a new fighter in 4 months, Schmued already has the design mapped out in his mind. He just needs to build it. The challenge is massive. North American has never built a fighter. The company makes trainers, the AT-6 Texan that taught thousands of pilots to fly. Reliable, simple aircraft. But fighters are different. They require cutting-edge aerodynamics, engines pushed to their absolute limits, structures that must be light enough to fly fast but strong enough to survive combat. Schmued assembles a team of engineers. Raymond Rice handles structural design. Larry Waite manages systems integration. Ed Horkey calculates aerodynamics with a slide rule, verifying Schmued's intuitive designs with cold mathematics. Art Chester figures out how to mount the Allison engine for perfect weight distribution and cooling. They work 18-hour days, 7 days a week. They eat at their desks. Sleep on cots in the factory. Outside, France collapses. The Battle of Britain begins. The Luftwaffe hammers British cities every night. And 5 men in California race to create a fighter from nothing. The pressure is crushing. If they fail, Britain might lose the war. If they succeed, they'll create something that's never existed before. A fighter that can be mass-produced like an automobile, but perform like a thoroughbred racehorse. The design that emerges is unlike anything flying. The wings use laminar-flow airfoils developed with NACA, NASA's predecessor. These wings maintain smooth airflow much longer than conventional designs, slashing drag. The cooling system is revolutionary. Instead of hanging the radiator below the fuselage where it creates drag, Schmued buries it inside the fuselage behind the pilot. The heated air exiting the radiator actually produces thrust, turning waste heat into propulsion. It's called the Meredith effect. Named after a British engineer who theorized it but never successfully built it, Schmued makes it work. Every surface is mathematically optimized for minimum drag. The fuselage is created using conic sections, a technique that produces perfectly smooth, flowing shapes. The entire airframe is divided into 5 major sections that can be built separately and bolted together on the assembly line. Mass production, without compromising performance. 78,000 man-hours later, on September 9, 1940, the prototype rolls out of the hangar. They beat the deadline by 18 days. The NA-73X, as it's designated, is beautiful, even sitting. Still, it looks fast, sleek, purposeful. Deadly. There's just one problem. It has no engine. Allison is late delivering the V-1710. October 26, 1940. Test pilot Vance Breeze climbs into the cockpit of the NA-73X for its first flight. The Allison engine coughs to life, settles into a smooth roar, Breeze taxis out. Lines up on the runway. Throttles up. The plane leaps into the air and exceeds every single performance target point 390 miles per hour, faster than any American fighter in production, stable, responsive, smooth as silk. The British are impressed enough to immediately order 320 aircraft. They name it the Mustang. Early testing reveals both the plane's brilliance and its Achilles heel. The laminar-flow wing works exactly as Schmued predicted, maintaining smooth airflow at speeds that cause other fighters to buffet and shake. The radiator scoop, which critics said would create massive drag, actually produces a small amount of thrust, just as Schmued calculated. But there's a problem. A serious problem. The Allison engine is excellent at low altitude, but above 15,000 feet, it wheezes and gasps like an old man climbing stairs. Its single-stage supercharger can't compress enough air at high altitude. While a Spitfire can fight effectively at 25,000 feet, the Mustang struggles above 15,000. The British find a solution: use the Mustang for low-altitude tactical reconnaissance and ground attack. Speed and range matter more than altitude performance for those missions. The first Mustangs reach Britain in October 1941. Number 26 Squadron at Gatwick receives them first. The pilots are skeptical. The Mustang doesn't look like a fighter. Its nose is too long. The cockpit sits too far back. The wings are straighter than a Spitfire's graceful curves. It looks like a racing plane. But when they fly it, their skepticism evaporates. Squadron leader Jeffrey Quill reports, "It was like stepping from a farm cart to a thoroughbred. The speed, the acceleration, the stability, everything about it was superior." The RAF immediately puts Mustangs to work on rhubarb missions, low-level sweeps over occupied France. Flying at 50 feet above the English Channel to avoid German radar, Mustang pilots cross the French coast at maximum speed, strafe airfields, attack trains, shoot up convoys, then race home before German fighters can intercept. Dangerous work, but effective. On May 10, 1942, Flying Officer Hollis Hills of 414 Squadron shoots down a Focke-Wulf 190 over France. The Mustangs first killed. By August, RAF Mustangs have claimed 20 German aircraft destroyed. But these are minor victories compared to what's coming. The real potential of the Mustang remains locked behind the limitations of its Allison engine, and the United States Army Air Forces isn't interested. When two Mustangs are delivered to Wright Field in Ohio in 1941 for evaluation, they sit on the ramp for months. Barely an hour of test flight logged. The Army Air Forces is committed to other fighters. Republic is building the P-47 Thunderbolt. Lockheed has the P-38 Lightning. Bell is producing P-39 Aircabras. Curtiss is still cranking out P-40s. The Mustang is seen as a British project, built for foreign money, irrelevant to American needs. When the evaluation report is finally written, it acknowledges the plane's excellent low-altitude performance, but criticizes its high-altitude limitations. The resistance at Wright Field is both institutional and personal. Major General Oliver Eccles, chief of the Material Division, has already committed the Army Air Forces to the P-47 as its primary fighter. Eccles controls procurement for the entire service. His word determines what planes get built, what engines get developed, what weapons get deployed. He sees the Mustang as a distraction from established programs. The P-47 is American-designed, American-powered, American-built. The Mustang is tainted by its British origins. Wright Field's test pilots file lukewarm reports. They complain about the cockpit layout, the gun arrangement, the fuel system. They find fault with everything except the plane's actual performance, which is superior to every American fighter in production. One test pilot writes that the Mustang handles like a truck compared to the P-40. Technically true at very low speeds. Completely irrelevant in combat where speed and acceleration matter infinitely more than slow speed handling. The bureaucratic resistance extends all the way to the top. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, shows no interest in the Mustang. He's focused on heavy bombers. Strategic bombing will win the war, he believes. Fighters are defensive weapons. Necessary, but not decisive. Arnold's staff reflects his priorities. Resources flow to bomber production. Bomber bases. Bomber crews. Fighters get the leftovers. Even when the British demonstrate the Mustang's potential, American officials remain skeptical. July 1942. The RAF uses Mustangs for the first long-range reconnaissance mission over Germany, flying from England to Cologne and back, 800 miles, photographing German installations and returning without loss. The mission proves the Mustang's range capability. Wright Field's response: order more reconnaissance versions, not fighters. The Army Air Forces orders 500 modified as dive bombers, designated A-36 Apache, another 310 as reconnaissance aircraft. But as a fighter, the plane that will eventually save the bomber offensive is ignored. The Mustang goes to war with the Royal Air Force, while the United States Army Air Forces continues losing bombers at catastrophic rates. The man who changes everything is not a general, not a Pentagon official. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Hitchcock Jr. is 41 years old. Too old for combat flying. But he has connections that reach the highest levels of power, and a personal history that reads like an adventure novel. In World War I, at age 17. Hitchcock joined the Lafayette Flying Corps, American volunteers fighting for France before the U.S. entered the war. He scored 3 victories. Shot down over enemy territory. Captured. Imprisoned in a German POW camp. Then he escaped, by jumping from a moving train and walking 100 miles through enemy territory to Switzerland. Between the wars, he became one of the world's greatest polo players, a 10-goal handicap, the highest rating possible, and a successful investment banker. When World War II begins, Hitchcock volunteers for combat, rejected for being overage. Instead, through his friend John Wynant, the American ambassador to Britain, he becomes assistant air attaché at the embassy in London. It's supposed to be a desk job. Hitchcock turns it into a one-man crusade to revolutionize American fighter aviation. April 1942. Ronald Harker, a test pilot for Rolls-Royce, flies a Mustang for the first time. He's astonished by its performance at low altitude, its range, its handling. But above 15,000 feet, the Allison engine struggles. Harker has an idea that seems obvious in retrospect, but revolutionary at the time. Put a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine in the Mustang. The Merlin has a 2-stage supercharger that maintains power to 30,000 feet. It powers the Spitfire, the Lancaster bomber. If it can be fitted to the Mustang, it would create the ultimate fighter. Rolls-Royce begins converting 5 Mustangs to Merlin power in June 1942. The first flies in October. The results are spectacular. The Merlin-powered Mustang reaches 440 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. 100 miles per hour faster than the Allison version. It can climb to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes. And it has the range to fly to Berlin and back. When Hitchcock sees the test results, he knows immediately what they mean. This is the plane that can save the bomber offensive. This is the fighter that can win the air war. He reports the results to Washington. The Army Air Forces isn't interested. The Mustang is still seen as a British project. The United States has already committed to the P-47 and P-38. Pentagon officials don't want to disrupt production for an unproven hybrid design. Hitchcock is stunned. American bombers are being slaughtered for want of escort fighters, and the solution is sitting right in front of them. The military bureaucracy can't see past its own prejudices and institutional inertia. Wright Field, the Army Air Forces Testing Center, is committed to American designs with American engines. The Mustang with a British engine is considered almost traitorous. Major General Oliver Eccles has already decided the P-47 will be the primary fighter. He controls procurement. His word is law. But Hitchcock didn't survive a German prison camp and walk across Switzerland to give up now. If official channels won't work, he'll go around them. He begins what his biographer calls a guerrilla campaign to force the Army Air Forces to accept the Merlin Mustang. He floods Washington with performance data, invites influential friends to watch flight demonstrations, hosts dinner parties, where he corners generals and undersecretaries, writes directly to General Henry Arnold, bypassing the entire chain of command. Arnold initially dismisses Hitchcock's appeals. The Army Air Forces has invested too much in existing fighters to change course now. But Hitchcock has one advantage: he knows Robert Lovett, the Assistant Secretary of War for Air. Lovett and Hitchcock flew together in World War I. When Hitchcock flies to Washington in November 1942, he goes straight to Lovett's office. He brings the test data from Britain. Photographs of the Merlin Mustang. Performance charts showing its superiority to every American fighter. Lovett understands immediately he's been watching the bomber loss rates. The strategic bombing campaign is failing without long-range escort. Lovett confronts Arnold directly. The bomber losses are unsustainable. The 8th Air Force is being bled white. Either they find a long-range escort fighter, or the daylight bombing campaign will have to be abandoned. Arnold, under pressure from above and below, finally relents. November 1942. He orders 2,200 P-51 Mustangs with Packard-built Merlin engines. North American Aviation will produce them at Inglewood, California, and a new plant in Dallas, Texas. But ordering the planes and getting them into combat are two different things. Production doesn't begin until June 1943. The first P-51B doesn't reach England until November 1940-3. By then, the 8th Air Force has lost over 1,000 bombers. 10,000 men, dead or captured. The delay costs lives that could have been saved. The technical challenges of producing the Merlin Mustang are enormous. Packard Motor Company has to retool its Detroit factories to build the Merlin engine under license. Every component must be converted from British to American measurements. Every specification translated from British to American standards. Packard engineers discover that Rolls-Royce craftsmen hand-fit many parts during assembly, adjusting each engine individually for optimal performance. Impossible in mass production. Packard has to redesign components for interchangeability while maintaining performance. The first Packard Merlin, designated V1650, comes off the production line in August 1942. 1,490 horsepower at takeoff, maintains power to 30,000 feet. When installed in the Mustang airframe, it transforms the aircraft's performance. Top speed increases from 390 to 441. Service ceiling rises from 31,000 feet to 42,000. More importantly, the Mustang can now fight effectively at the altitudes where bomber formations fly. North American Aviation faces its own production challenges. The Inglewood plant is already at capacity, building B-25 Mitchell bombers. To produce Mustangs in quantity, they need an entirely new factory. Dallas, Texas. Construction begins April 1943. The first Dallas-built Mustang, designated P-51C to distinguish it from the California-built P-51B, rolls off the assembly line in August. The two models are identical except for their birthplace. Meanwhile, the 8th Air Force is bleeding. Summer and fall 1943. Bomber losses reach catastrophic levels. The raid on Schweinfurt-Regensburg on August 17 cost 60 bombers. Bremen on October 8, 30 bombers lost. Munster on October 10, another 30 gone. Bomber crews are calculating their odds with grim mathematics. At current loss rates, a crew has a 1 in 4 chance of completing their 25 mission tour. 1 in 4. Morale is collapsing. Some crews refuse to fly. The strategic bombing campaign is on the verge of failure. Then, in November 1943, the 354th Fighter Group receives Merlin-powered Mustangs. They're based at Boxted, Essex. The pilots have been flying P-39s, mediocre fighters nicknamed flying coffins. When they see their new P-51Bs, they can't believe the difference. The acceleration is incredible. It climbs like a rocket. At 25,000 feet, where the P-39 could barely function, the Mustang is just getting started. The first escort mission with P-51 Mustangs is flown December 5, 1943. Amiens, France. A short mission, well within P-47 range, intended to test the new fighters. They performed flawlessly. December 13th. Mustangs escort bombers to Kiel, Germany. 400 miles from base. For the first time, American fighters provide protection deep into German airspace. December 20th. Bremen. January 7, 1944. Ludwigshafen Point, 500 miles from England. The impact is immediate and dramatic. October 1943. Before Mustangs arrive, the 8th Air Force loses 9.1% of bombers that attack their targets. January 1944. With limited Mustang escort, losses drop to 6.3%. February. With more Mustangs arriving, losses fall to 3.5%. The bomber crews call the Mustangs their little friends. For the first time since the campaign began, they have protection all the way to the target and back. The Mustang pilots quickly develop tactics to maximize their effectiveness. Instead of staying close to bomber formations, they range ahead and to the sides, hunting German fighters before they can attack. Colonel Donald Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group pioneers these aggressive tactics. He tells his pilots, "Forget defensive flying. Attack everything. Chase the Germans to their airfields. Shoot them down while they're landing. Make them afraid to take off." The results are devastating for the Luftwaffe. Major James Howard of the 354th Fighter Group single-handedly defends an entire bomber formation on January 11, 1944. Alone. Separated from his squadron, Howard attacks 30 German fighters, shoots down 4. Probably destroys 2 more. Damages 2 others. For 30 minutes, he's the only fighter defending the bombers. He receives the Medal of Honor. Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group becomes known as Ace of Aces. Flying his Mustang named Shangri-La, Gentile shoots down 21.8 German aircraft in air combat. Destroys 6 more on the ground. His wingman, Lieutenant John Godfrey, shoots down 18 aircraft. Together, they form the most successful fighter team in the 8th Air Force. General Dwight Eisenhower calls Gentile a one-man Air Force. Major George Preddy of the 352nd Fighter Group achieves the highest score of any Mustang pilot. August 6, 1944. Despite nursing a hangover from a party the night before, Preddy leads his squadron against a formation of 30 German fighters attacking bombers over Hamburg. In 8 minutes of combat, Preddy destroys 6 enemy aircraft. Saves dozens of bombers. He'll eventually shoot down 26.83 German aircraft before being killed by American anti-aircraft fire on Christmas Day, 1944. A tragic case of friendly fire. But the Real Revolution comes March 4, 1944. That's the date American fighters first appear over Berlin. 68 Mustangs escort 660 B-17s and B-24s to the German capital. The psychological impact on both sides is enormous. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, later says, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." The technical reasons for the Mustang's superiority are straightforward. With internal fuel and drop tanks, it can fly 1,300 miles. The P-47, even with maximum external fuel, can only manage 600. The Mustang can cruise at 325 miles per hour while using less fuel than a P-47 uses at 250 at 25,000 feet. The Mustang is 50 miles per hour faster than a P-47 and 70 faster than a Messerschmitt Bf 109. More importantly, the Mustang changes the entire nature of the air war. Previously, American fighters were defensive, protecting bombers from attack. The Mustang is offensive. After escorting bombers to their targets, Mustangs drop to low altitude and strafe German airfields, destroying planes on the ground. They hunt German fighters trying to land, catching them when they're low on fuel and ammunition. They patrol German training areas, shooting down instructors and students before they can become operational pilots. By April 1944, the Luftwaffe is losing more planes than it can replace. More critically, it's losing experienced pilots faster than it can train new ones. April and May 1944. The Luftwaffe loses 800 fighters. 600 pilots. The Mustang isn't just protecting bombers. It's destroying the Luftwaffe's ability to fight. German pilots who survive these encounters speak with a mixture of respect and fear. Major Wilhelm Goose of Jägerschwader 26 recalls, "We could no longer predict where the American fighters would be. They were everywhere. Above us. Behind us. Waiting at our airfields. The Mustang had the range to follow us anywhere. We had lost control of our own airspace. Lieutenant General Adolf Galland, commander of German fighter forces, understands the implications immediately. The Mustang isn't just another fighter. It's a strategic weapon that neutralizes Germany's geographic advantage. For 3 years, the heart of Germany has been protected by distance. Allied fighters couldn't reach Berlin, Munich, the vital industrial areas of the Ruhr. German factories could produce weapons in relative safety. Training bases could prepare new pilots without interference. The Mustang destroys that sanctuary. Galland tries to adapt German tactics to counter the Mustang threat. He orders pilots to avoid combat unless they have numerical superiority. Concentrates fighters around key targets, hoping to overwhelm escorts with mass attacks. Develops new formations designed to break through fighter screens. Nothing works. The Mustangs are too fast, too numerous, too aggressive. They hunt in packs, covering each other, never giving German pilots an opening. The technological response is equally futile. Germany rushes development of jet fighters. The Messerschmitt 262 and Arado 234. These aircraft are faster than Mustangs in level flight, but they're unreliable, short-ranged, vulnerable during takeoff and landing. Mustang pilots quickly learn to patrol German jet bases, catching the jets at their most vulnerable moments. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group shoots down 2 Messerschmitt 262 jets in a single mission on October 7, 1944, proving that even Germany's wonder weapons aren't immune to the Mustang. The production battle is even more one-sided. 1944. North American Aviation produces 5,700 Mustangs. Germany produces 2,800 fighters of all types combined. The mathematical reality is inescapable. For every German fighter destroyed, America can produce 2 replacements. For every German pilot killed, America has 3 ready to take his place. The Luftwaffe isn't just losing the air war. It's being systematically annihilated. German pilots develop gallows humor about their situation. They joke that the Luftwaffe's new mission is to provide target practice for American fighters. They call themselves the Suicide Squadron, because life expectancy is measured in weeks, sometimes days. New pilots arriving from training are called lambs, because everyone knows they'll be slaughtered. The few veterans who survive become increasingly fatalistic. They fly because it's their duty, not because they believe they can win. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces land at Normandy. The Luftwaffe manages 300 sorties over the invasion beaches. The Allies fly 14,600 sorties the same day. The air superiority that made D-Day possible was won by the Mustang. The statistics tell the story. 1943. Before Mustangs arrived, American fighters claimed a ratio of 1 German fighter shot down for every 1.2 American fighters lost. Early 1944. With Mustangs operating in numbers, the ratio changes to 4 German fighters shot down for every Mustang lost. By war's end, Mustang pilots destroy 4,950 enemy aircraft in aerial combat. 4,131 on the ground. The ground attack missions are particularly devastating. After escorting bombers to their targets, Mustangs drop to treetop level and hunt targets of opportunity. They destroy locomotives, stopping German supply trains, strafe truck convoys, preventing reinforcements from reaching the front, attack airfields, destroying planes before they can take off. April 16, 1944. A single mission. Mustangs destroy 135 German aircraft on the ground. The impact on German pilot training is catastrophic. Before the Mustang arrived, new Luftwaffe pilots received 200 hours of flight training before entering combat. Early 1944, reduced to 100 hours. Summer of 44, new pilots are sent into combat with less than 50 hours of flight time. They're not pilots. They're victims waiting to be shot down. Veteran German ace Gunther Rall, who survives the war with 275 victories, describes the situation. We were sending children to their deaths. Boys who could barely fly, let alone fight. They would take off in the morning and be dead by noon. The Mustangs were waiting for them, experienced pilots in superior aircraft. It wasn't combat. It was execution. The fuel situation makes things worse. Germany is running out of aviation gasoline. Pilot training is curtailed to save fuel for combat operations. But combat operations are burning pilots faster than they can be replaced. It's a death spiral. Fewer pilots mean more losses. More losses mean fewer instructors. Fewer instructors mean worse training. Worse training means more losses. December 1944. The Luftwaffe launches suicide attacks. Sonderkommando Elba pilots are ordered to ram American bombers, sacrificing themselves and their aircraft to destroy a single bomber. Desperation born of impotence. The mighty Luftwaffe that terrorized Europe is reduced to kamikaze tactics. Even these desperate measures fail. Mustang escorts shoot down most of the ramming fighters before they can reach the bombers. But the man most responsible for the Mustang's success won't live to see victory. April 18, 1944. Thomas Hitchcock is testing a P-51 at Salisbury, England. His plane crashes. He's killed instantly. The official report indicates he was unable to pull out of a dive during testing, suggesting he might have been pushing the aircraft to its limits, still fighting to improve it, still refusing to accept anything less than perfection. Edgar Schmued, the designer who created the Mustang, receives no official recognition during the war. His name appears in no reports. He's never decorated or promoted. After the war, he continues designing aircraft for North American, creating the F-86 Sabre jet that will dominate in Korea. When asked about the Mustang years later, Schmued says simply, "We just built what they asked for. The British asked for a good airplane. We gave them one." The institutional resistance that nearly killed the Mustang is never officially acknowledged. The Army Air Force's history of World War II mentions only that the Mustang was developed for the British and later adopted by American forces. No mention of the 2-year delay. The bureaucratic opposition. The fact that Wright Field ignored the plane while bombers were being slaughtered. General Oliver Eccles, who opposed the Mustang, is promoted and decorated, retires as a major general, reputation intact. But the pilots who flew the missions know the truth. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commander of the 4th Fighter Group, says after the war, "The Mustang won the air war over Europe. Without it, the invasion would have been impossible. The bombers couldn't have continued. We would have lost." Captain Robert Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group is more direct. "The brass nearly killed us all by ignoring the Mustang. Thank God for the British and Tommy Hitchcock. They saved our asses. The broader lesson of the Mustang isn't about technology. It's about institutional blindness. The United States Army Air Forces built an entire doctrine around self-defending bombers. When that doctrine failed catastrophically, the institution couldn't admit its error. It took an outsider, Hitchcock, operating outside normal channels to force change. It took a foreign power, Britain, to recognize the Mustang's potential when its own country wouldn't. It took unnecessary losses, thousands of deaths that could have been prevented, before reality overwhelmed bureaucracy. The cost of this institutional failure is measured in lives. Between October 1943, when bomber losses peaked, and March 1944, when Mustangs began escorting in numbers, approximately 2,000 American airmen were killed or captured in missions that Mustang escort could have protected. These weren't statistics. They were young men with families, dreams, futures that were cut short because bureaucrats at Wright Field couldn't see past their prejudices. Each B-17 carried 10 men. A pilot and co-pilot barely out of flight school. A bombardier who'd trained for months to drop bombs accurately from 25,000 feet. A navigator who could find a target through clouds and flak using only a compass and stopwatch. .6 gunners, most of them teenagers, who manned the 50 caliber machine guns that were supposed to protect the bomber, but couldn't. When a B-17 went down, 10 families received telegrams. 10 mothers cried. 10 sets of dreams died over Germany. North American Aviation built 15,586 Mustangs during the war. They served in every theater, with every Allied Air Force. After the war, they continued flying in Korea, during the Israeli War of Independence, in dozens of other conflicts. The last military Mustangs were retired by the Dominican Air Force in 1984. 40 years after they first entered combat. Today, about 300 Mustangs still exist. Half still flying. They're preserved not as weapons, but as reminders of what almost wasn't. In the Pacific Theater, Mustangs arrived late, but proved equally dominant. Based on Iwo Jima, Mustangs escorted B-29 superfortresses to Japan. 1,500 miles round trip. They shot down Japanese fighters, strafed airfields, attacked shipping. April 7, 1945. Mustangs shoot down 21 Japanese aircraft without loss. The Japanese, like the Germans before them, find their airspace has become a hunting ground for American fighters. The very long-range missions over the Pacific push the Mustang to its limits. Pilots fly 7-hour missions, sitting in cramped cockpits, managing fuel consumption with obsessive precision. 1 gallon too much burned on the outbound leg means ditching in the ocean. On the way home, navigation has to be perfect. A 1-degree error over 1,500 miles of ocean means missing the tiny island of Iwo Jima entirely. Yet they do it, day after day, extending American air power to the Japanese homeland. When the Korean War begins in 1950, the Mustang is supposedly obsolete. Jets have taken over the fighter role. But the F-80 Shooting Star jets lack range and loiter time for close air support. The Mustang, now designated F-51, is recalled to service. Flying from rough airstrips in Korea, Mustangs provide close air support for United Nations ground forces. They can carry rockets, bombs, napalm, loiter over the battlefield for hours, put ordnance precisely where needed. The Mustang's last combat missions are flown by the South African Air Force in Korea in January 1953. It's a fitting end. The plane that had been ignored, rejected, and nearly discarded outlasted its critics and competitors. It served longer, flew farther, destroyed more enemies than any other American fighter of its generation. The Mustang succeeded not because of the system, but in spite of it. It survived bureaucratic hostility, institutional prejudice, willful blindness. It became the greatest fighter of World War II not because American military leadership recognized its value, but because a German immigrant designer created something revolutionary, because a British commission was desperate enough to fund it, and because a polo-playing former fighter pilot refused to accept no for an answer. 1943. General Adolf Galland, commander of German fighter forces, is asked by Hermann Göring what he needs to win the air war. Galland replies, "Give me Mustangs." He's being sarcastic, but he's also acknowledging a simple truth. The Mustang wasn't just the best American fighter. Or the best Allied fighter. It was the best fighter. Period. And it almost never happened at all. The most telling statistic isn't the number of German planes shot down. Or the number of bombers saved. It's this: between October 1943 and May 1944, the period when Mustangs were arriving in numbers, the loss rate for 8th Air Force bombers dropped from 9.1% to 2.7%. That difference, 6.4%, represented hundreds of bombers, thousands of lives. Those were men who came home because the Mustang finally arrived. They were men who would have died if the bureaucracy had gotten its way. James Howard Kindleberger died in 1960-2. At his funeral, dozens of former bomber pilots attended. They weren't there because he ran an aircraft company. They were there because his planes saved their lives. One of them, former B-17 pilot William Lawley, a Medal of Honor recipient, said at the service, "Every time I see a Mustang, I think of the friends who made it home because that plane was there. And I think of the friends who didn't make it home because it came too late." The P-51 Mustang changed the air war over Europe. It made the invasion of Normandy possible. It saved countless Allied lives. But its greatest achievement wasn't what it did. It was what it represented. The triumph of innovation over bureaucracy. Of performance over politics. Of results over regulations. It was proof that sometimes the best weapon is the one the system doesn't want. Sometimes the most important victories are won not on the battlefield, but in conference rooms and corridors where decisions are made or avoided, where planes are ordered or ignored, where wars are won or lost before they're ever fought. The sky above Germany in 1944 told a story. Silver Mustangs wheeling through the clouds. Contrails painting white lines across blue canvas. The distant thunder of 50 caliber guns. The desperate dive of a Messerschmitt trying to escape. The steady drone of bomber formations finally knowing, that someone was watching over them. That day didn't just change. The war.it changed every man who lived to tell the story. The engines fell silent long ago. But their echoes still whisper across the English countryside, where young men once climbed into cockpits and flew toward an uncertain dawn. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist rolls in, you can almost hear them still, the sound of freedom, carried on silver wings.